You are good to go. Promise.
Okay, what is your name?
Okay, my name is Jacob Jones.
How long have you been medicating?
I've been medicating since October of 2011 whenever I got to experience the medical cannabis industry out west.
And why do you medicate?
I medicate to relieve conditions that I wouldn't have if it wasn't for our illogical policy regarding cannabis.
How does it help you with your medical condition?
Whenever I medicate, it stimulates my appetite, it relieves my traumatic memories, it allows me to relax, it allows me to sleep, and probably so much more I'm forgetting right now.
What are some of the side effects of using medical cannabis?
Do you mean negative side effects?
Yeah, things you don't like.
After you medicate with cannabis, you will start to become a social outcast. People will judge you because you use an illegal substance. And you risk a lot of penalties concerning the law. There really are no health side effects as far as responsibly medicating goes.
Why did you decide to start using medical cannabis?
When did I decide?
Why did you
Why?
decide to start?
I was tired with my life of starving myself, my life of never being happy with the situation I was in, the life of misery. I mean, I needed something that was safe and effective in my life.
Does your doctor support your decision to use cannabis as a medication?
I'm not sure. I doubt it. But I have not had the conversation with my doctor. That's bad of me for being an activist.
What does your family and friends think of you using medical cannabis?
I've always had a life concerning or just dealing with cannabis, and my friends have basically been based on if they can handle my family's culture or not. My family is fine with my use or my taking of this medication. Some of my friends have, they deleted me from social media. They've kind of disconnected themselves from me, or the loss made me disconnect myself from them, or something similar.
Why do you want medical cannabis legalized?
Many reasons. There's many reasons it should be legalized. The first thing is probably for the truth. I mean, it was wrongfully made illegal. And secondly, I mean, it's for the patients. This is about legalizing medical marijuana, correct? The question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, it's for the patients. We all have an endocannabinoid system, and these patients are suffering from cancer, MS, and all the other conditions and ailments. They have a weak endocannabinoid system, and that is why their cells cannot fight off these diseases. Their immune system is weaker because they do not have a supplement for the system, and they need safe access to this legal access to a safe and effective therapeutic medicine that 18 states and DC have allowed for their patients. I mean, this is Kentucky's time.
Do you participate in any form of activism?
Yeah, just recently, whenever I started medicating, really, I had the opportunity to go to Oaksterdam in October and got to experience their medical industry over there for a few months. And that's where I discovered the many medical benefits that this plant actually has, how much we've been lied to, and just the necessity of bringing this change to the state of Kentucky. I met many patients that just got so much relief from this. Patients that used it as an alternative to chemotherapy, who weaned themselves from many medications just by the use of this medicine.
How do you medicate?
In an illegal state, it's hard to medicate. But whenever I was out west, I medicated many different ways. I was introduced to cooking and doing cannabis in edible forms. I was introduced to tinctures over there, and I've always known about vaporizing and how it was the safest way. Vaporizing hash was the safest way you could take this medicine, and I really got to be familiar with the cooking of the plant, but not the actual consuming of the raw plant. That's still something that interests me.
Have you ever been hassled by law enforcement?
Other than the instance that happened in my early childhood, no, not that I can say that I have. I haven't really been that public to be harassed by them yet, but I guess we'll see in the future.
Just for my, just so you know, because I know sometimes you got your eyes catch the camera.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
If you just stay more with her, you'll be cool.
Okay.
And is the fly bothering you?
No, I didn't see
Okay.
it.
Good. It's gonna be on the camera though. I've seen it fly by you a couple times. As long as you're cool, good, then we should be good. He's pissing me off, and I'm really trying
He's
to keep
on the
everything
pole right there.
good. Is he? Well, okay. We're just gonna let him hopefully rest and stay out of the camera view. He's trying to get spot time, and that's the problem. Jake, can you tell me any of the last memories that you have of your father as a child? Do you have any specific memories of your dad?
The most impressionable memory I have of my father is his execution on that Sunday. Before that, I vaguely have a memory of me driving with him or riding with him, but not many. I think the shock and trauma of this day, 1993, August the 8th, I think the shock and trauma of that just basically made me forget the past memories. I have memories of my father walking to the fence that day whenever the helicopters rattled our trailer and landed in our nearby field. I do remember my father walking to our fence, putting his hands over the fence, and two officers or two officials, I'm not sure who they were, but they had opportunity to arrest my father or anything here. This was the only time of negotiation that I'm aware of that I can remember, this was the only time of negotiation that happened with this event. The two officers in the helicopter, they asked my father if these were his plants. He said yes, and they said, we're going to have to cut them down. And he said, over my dead body. And they got back in the helicopter and they left. And that happened early Sunday morning. Throughout, that started a standoff. According to the media, it was a standoff. According to the media, my father had held me and my mother hostage, and then after that, my memories go to not much throughout the day. After that, I know like my family just continued the day as normal, and he took a shower, my mom took a shower, we were trying to leave. The truck wouldn't let us leave, wouldn't start. My father went out there and was working on a truck for a few hours. He also was teaching me how to hammer around this time. More police started showing up in cruisers and surrounding the property, and still no form of negotiation and still no contact with officials or my father. My father was unarmed in plain view for I'm not sure, it's over 5 hours. The standoff lasted 7 or 8 hours, and my father was outside for most of this duration, and he was teaching me how to hammer a nail, he was playing with me in a sandbox, he was just spending time with me. And I don't have much of a memory of that. Other than that, I guess my memory picks up where my conscience had to understand the event and what was actually happening. There were close to 30 policemen lined up in front of us along the front side of our fence, and to the right of us they basically just had a little area covered, perimeter. And I remember having to understand the event that was going to happen. I seen the fear, or I had fear of the opposition. I knew what the police were going to do that day. I can't really remember how the process went down, but I do remember running back inside, grabbing a toy sword and running back outside and waving it through our front gate, thinking that I've, solved something, protected my family. But moments later, I remember just a loud noise, really, and thinking back to it now, it's probably they shot my father first with a rubber bullet, and it's probably the sound of that. And to my recollection, though, it sounded more like a concussion grenade or just a loud explosive. And I remember, the pain in my ears. I remember after that, my father walking toward police with his hands in the air, with a rifle, just maybe at right shoulder arms, just propping it on his right shoulder, and or actually I think both hands were in the air, so it was just in his right hand, just in the air with the safety on. And my father was a Vietnam veteran. He was drafted to serve in that war. He was taught and throughout boot camp instilled in him that his weapon was his friend. And after the war, after serving his time, after receiving his injury, after receiving the Purple Heart among other medals, he felt like he should have the right to medicate. My father discovered cannabis in Vietnam after he received his injury, and that's when he realized all the lies that he was told by his family, by the public, just by everybody, that it would make you go crazy, kill your brother, and just all the false claims and mistruths of the Reefer Madness movement. My father after that was when he was receiving treatment for his injuries. He saved fellow soldiers and received injury to his left arm and had some type of metal implanted in his arm, stabilizing it and restricting movement, basically. It added a lot of weight to his arm. The Army claimed him 50% disabled. During treatment, he worked as a groundskeeper at the hospital, and he picked up his fellow officers and fellow soldiers cigarette butts and stuff, and that's where he really got to understand the fact that cigarette users have more rights in this country than a veteran does, and he went and fought for this country, and that was hard for him to accept, and it's all fuel to him basically starting medicating personally with his medical garden. Not sure how many years he actually had it, but I know he grew in the woods before this year, and he was tired of hiding and being a criminal, being looked at differently by the public, by the law, for something that is safe and something that is medicine for him. He had post-traumatic stress from the war, he had depression, chronic pain, he lost his daughter in a divorce, so he was crushed by that after the war. After that, he was involved in a motorcycle wreck to where he broke many bones in his body and was like laid up for over a year just on bed rest. And after that was when he really started getting disgusted with our laws and the fact that his freedom was being taken away by our policy. So my father, he went up to my father started getting an attitude about him. He was a religious man. He thought he was in the clear, but unfortunately he chose to improve the quality of his life under our current policy, and that ultimately resulted in his death. But it got so... My father wanted everyone... He didn't want to hide anymore, and he really maybe overstepped it a little bit, but he would go up to the town this year, or maybe a year before this event happened. He went up to town to pay his taxes, and on the back of his taxes he wrote that he would be growing medical cannabis on his property that he paid taxes on. And he even told the sheriff while he was paying his taxes that this was what he was going to do. And a year later, my father was killed. It wasn't until he was afraid of hiding, or not afraid, but just angry that he had to hide in the woods for something that helped him. He was getting old. He was getting a lot of pain from the war, a lot of arthritis. He wasn't in the mood to take nutrients or fertilizer on a four-wheeler through the woods, hike a mile or two on his property to do something that he should be allowed to do in his garden, which is what he did eventually. And he grew, 93 at this event, he had 25 plants. He had 13 plants and 12 clones, and he had them just in random places. He had them in a garden. He even had some along the trailer. Not really for decoration, but maybe because the condition of the temperatures. The temperature near the trailer is hotter, so he might have been trying to do an experiment there. But the plants grew over the trailer eventually, and the ones in the garden he tied down like tomato plants. And I mean, he may even have got away with that for a few years, I'm not really sure. But you all can use this next part if you want to. But my father, what my uncle believes to be the reason for this event to happen was my father eventually got to the point to where he wanted to write "fuck you" on the garage in paint for the helicopters on the roof to see, for the gunships that roam Kentucky in search of a few plants growing in the woods. And he wanted to do that. Well, my mother wouldn't let him, and he then resorted to riding it on the front of the garage. And my uncle believes that this is the reason why police was prone to do what they did that day. Accordingly, my neighbor who drove by was not pleased that my father did that, and he was not going to allow his grandchildren to view that. And apparently that's where the source came to the cops, the anonymous call telling them about my father and his medical garden. But that's all just suspicion. The facts are that law enforcement did come to my house Sunday morning, and they did unjustly murder my father in front of me. They restricted fellow family members who were a law enforcement officer themselves. Recently just completed negotiation training. They forced them not to confront my father. They restricted him outside in just a public mob, basically, because this was a 8-hour event, and by the end there were quite a few people in attendance down on our road that has been blocked off by this point. The reason that it took 8 hours, though, is the Kentucky Marijuana Task Force, maybe they work with the National Guard, but they, and this might be just alleged too, I don't know, but they were on the way in a helicopter to my property, and the helicopter crashed. They had to do an emergency landing, and they were then drove to my property, and that's why it took as long as it did. Police tried really hard to make my father look like a criminal that he wasn't that day. Like I said earlier, there was no negotiation. My father was in plain sight, unarmed, for many hours of that day. He was showing how peaceful he was. He was playing with me. He was teaching me skills. He was being active with me and my mom. There was no signs of my mother and I being a hostage. My mother even tried to take me on leave on a few occasions that day, and law enforcement restricted us from leaving, or rather I say intimidated us from leaving. The helicopters would swoop down really low and scare my mom back, and then whenever we tried to go out the front gate, law enforcement just intimidated my mom. So we stayed there that day, and to my memory, I can still hear the sounds. I can still hear the gunshots going off. The autopsy report shows my father was shot through the armpits without hitting the arms. So that proves that his arms were in the air whenever they shot. And there was no just reason. My father wasn't a dealer. He wasn't doing anything illegal other than growing a medicine, a safe medicine that is wrongly classified in the Controlled Substance Act. And that's all that he was at fault for, but that's not what law enforcement wanted that day. They drug it out. They knew my father would, knowing his history and his service time, and they knew he would arm himself eventually that day. And my father was under the impression that he was getting to speak to the officers at this time. He was going to confront them. I guess this was going to be their negotiation attempt. I don't know. But he did arm himself with his rifle, and he did have the safety on, and he did have it raised in the air with both hands in the air. Law enforcement later stated that the only reason they really killed him was because he had a weapon that could penetrate their vest, their bulletproof vest. And that was, whenever that was said, that was during the lawsuit that encountered afterwards. There was a 7-year lawsuit, basically, that my family was drug in, and my uncle was suing the state, and I believe, and my mother was not a part of him, but somehow we were suing them too, but in the same case. My mother was only suing for an apology for me. My uncle was suing for millions of dollars, and law enforcement basically stated that if they gave me an apology, they'd be stating that they were in the wrong and that they couldn't do that. But that's just, there were many wrong things that happened in the court system whenever my mother was in it. My mother was hit in the head with a fragment. She was grazed in the head whenever the exploding bullets were fired to kill my father. She was also injured, and by the end of that day, I was covered with both of my parents' blood. That's how close I was to my father. The news reported that I was covered with my father's blood, and by the time of the shooting, I was close to my mother, and whenever she got hit with a bullet fragment, I was covered with her blood as well. She was shot in the head. Police later, I guess instantly, forced us into the back of a police cruiser, and I was still covered in blood. My mother was handcuffed, and just the compassion from law enforcement was not there that day. They did not care about the well-being of me, my mother, or my father, and even in the court system, I mean, they ridiculed my mother on so many occasions. They said that her bullet wound, was she sure that it was a bullet fragment that hit her, or did she just bump her head on a cabinet inside the house? That's how ridiculous the judge and the police officer